And probably everyone knows what the Independent Redistricting Commission is, but if anyone doesn't, it is a commission in Arizona that draws those so important lines for all the districts, for the congressional districts and the legislative districts. And that's what happens in other states when they have gerrymandering. And so we are taking a very active role in this, and public comment is allowed. And we're encouraging people to get involved in that, because we want them to hear public comment from more than just a few people, so that it has more impact. So that's a very, very important place to get involved. So we are recording this meeting, and I just wanted to let everyone know you're welcome to turn off your videos if you don't want your lovely faces on the video, but we record it and we do put it up on our website. So if you ever miss a meeting, you can always go to our website and you can watch it from there. And so if you want to skip all the announcement, you can fast forward over that part, right? So please come back and watch it later if you're not able to watch it now. And now I'm going to turn it over totally to Ellen. She's going to tell us about our program in June and also introduce the speakers.
Yes, we have a great program for June. It will be a highlights of the legislative session, highlights and lowlights of the legislative session in the Arizona State Legislature. We have Minority Leader Reginald Boulding from the House of Representatives joining us. And that should be fascinating. And we will probably be also having somebody from Progress, Arizona, and they know all about the legislation. It'll be fascinating. And then in July, we're going to have a program on gun control. And we've got some good speakers for that too. The June session will be June 17th. July will be July 15th. So please put those in your calendar. It's always the third Thursday of the month. Well, there are just a few people on your screen that you don't recognize right now. One of them is Tane West. She belongs to the generation that we are going to pass our baton to. She is a coordinator with the Alice Paul Institute in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, an organization that is very near and dear to my heart. It just so happens that I keep a picture of Alice Paul framed and on my desk in my office because she is one of my heroes. She's amazing, and she is actually the person who drafted the first version of the Equal Rights Amendment back in 1922 or 23. So thanks to Alice, we have the Equal Rights Amendment, and it has been introduced to almost every session of Congress since that year. Not much has been going on with it lately. At least it hasn't been in the news as much as it used to be. And so Tane is going to talk to us a little bit about what's happening with the Equal Rights Amendment. A lot of people think it's already passed. Other people think it's not even necessary. So we thought it would be great to have an expert come and tell us what's happening with the Equal Rights Amendment now. So Tane, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. And please make a pitch for Alice Paul Institute.
Yes, thank you so much, Ellen. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I just couldn't be happier. I want to take a note from Kathy and start by giving my mom a little credit here also. I loved it. Her grandmother actually retired to Arizona, to Sedona, and she spent summers there. So I have your area of the US is very dear to my heart because she brought me there when I was younger a few times and just fell in love with Arizona, and then met my husband who went to Prescott, was at Embry-Riddle, and he is a pilot for the Air Force. And that is how we ended up in New Jersey. This was his first assignment, and luckily we are 15 minutes down the road from this beautiful house that you are now seeing on your screen. This is where the Alice Paul Institute runs out of these days. This was Alice Paul's birthplace and the place where she grew up. It is in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. And we run all kinds of programs out of there. If you are ever in the area, please come see us. Come take a tour and come see the house is on 6 acres. It's beautiful. We have programs for children and adults. So anyways, when you're in the neighborhood. I also want to point out first, I'll mention Alice's mom. She, in 1884, was a sophomore or junior in college and married Alice's father and had to stop going to school because that was not allowed. You could not be married and go to college. So they are a Quaker family based out of this area, long lineage of Quaker background. They're Hicksite Quakers, which was more of a, well, just a more activist-driven branch, and equality is one of their top values. So Alice grew up with activist parents and became one herself. As soon as she was done with the fight for suffrage in 1920, in August 26th of 1920, she was off to the races. She wanted to embed equal rights in the Constitution for women. She went to law school. She had already gotten a PhD in economics, but she went back to school, started over again, and thought that the best place for her to affect laws further would be to study law. So in 1923, she authored the Equal Rights Amendment and introduced it at the 75th anniversary of the Seneca Falls Convention. In 1943, she rewrote the Equal Rights Amendment to reflect a bit better the language of the 15th and 19th Amendment. She thought that this would be a more digestible version and would hopefully go further. It did have traction back then as women were in the workforce, and after the Depression and World War II ended, there was more push for women to be included in the Constitution and become citizens, essentially, of the US. Unfortunately, nothing happened until 1972 with the Civil Rights Movement and everyone taking to the streets again. There was more push, and finally the House and the Senate passed the Equal Rights Amendment, proposed as the 27th Amendment then. Unfortunately, Congress started this habit. Other than the 19th Amendment, every amendment since the 15th, since the 18th, Congress had put a time limit in the preamble of every amendment. And so they gave the Equal Rights Amendment 7 years to get ratified by the states. It was a successful campaign, it looked like at first. So many states ratified it, got to 35, and Congress even extended the time limit by 3 years. 1982 was the end date then instead of 78 or 79. And so no other states ratified it though. So we'll come closer to us. In 1993, the 27th Amendment was ratified, and it had a 203-year history. And so legal scholars at the time said, well, this means that the Equal Rights Amendment should still be viable. So there's kind of been two strategies being employed since then. The begin anew, which is exactly what it sounds like, starting over and getting Congress to re-ratify reassert the amendment for states to re-ratify. That has not really gone anywhere, unfortunately, other than, like Ellen mentioned, every year since 93, the ERA has been proposed. And as she said, since 1923, it really has been almost every year. But the three-state strategy actually got traction starting in 2017 when Nevada ratified the amendment. And this was 40 years after the last state had ratified. And so taking that amendment and rolling, Illinois in 2018 and Virginia in 2020. The only real hiccup here, it should be ratified, right? This is our 38 states. We made it to the 3/4 of states. That is the necessary to get an amendment ratified into the Constitution. There are a few things though. 5 states, almost immediately after ratification in the 70s, their legislators decided to rescind that ratification. This shouldn't have any legal traction. Article 5 of the Constitution talks only or speaks only to the power of the state's power to ratify an amendment and not the power to rescind a ratification. All precedents concerning state rescissions of ratifications indicate that such actions are not valid and that the constitutional amendment process as described in Article 5 allows only for ratification. So none of that should have legal bearing, but there is still efforts in states to pass the ERA, so that would become a null point. If we could get 5 more states to ratify, you know, nobody wants to be the last state to ratify the ERA, please. Anyways, that's one thing we urge. But and actually, you all had legislation yesterday proposed. Yeah, so it could work. That is another way that is possible of getting this, making this happen. So the other thing is when Virginia ratified in last year in January of 2020, the archivist should have published the amendment. Thanks to the Attorney General's office of the time sending a 38-page letter that recommended the archivist didn't publish it. There is no legal footing, or there's not as good a legal standing to pressure states to look at that 3rd section of the ERA that said if there's a 2-year time limit. That's to give states time to make sure that their laws, all their legislation is in line with the 1st section of the Equal Rights Amendment. And so the real problem, usually when the archivist publishes an amendment, it is largely just ceremonial. It doesn't actually do anything other than make the states conform. And so there's, oh goodness, a lawsuit right now by Equal Means Equal to get the archivist to essentially ignore the letter and go ahead and publish it, because again, I will just point out that Congress should have the only power. Congress is, in the Constitution, is given the power to pass amendments. That lies with Congress, that does not lie with the executive branch. So this is also unprecedented, where the archivist is just seemingly arbitrarily, but with this letter from the AG's office, just refusing to publish the ERA. So the other thing that's going on is the House and the Senate can pass their rescission of the time limit. They put this time limit into the preamble. So states didn't actually vote on that language, that time limit language, when they ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. And so just as easily as Congress can add the time limit to the preamble, they should be able to take it away. And this seems like the strongest route to ratification and just getting it in there. The House voted last year and passed their legislation, and the Senate refused to take up their own version, their sister bill of it. But this year, we are hoping the House passed HJ Res 17 in March, and the Senate proposed its sister bill to remove the time limit as Senate Joint Resolution 1 this year. So it is important. They know how important this is. But with the filibuster, there is no room to bring it to the floor yet because they need those extra 10 votes. So that pretty much brings us up to date. I'll mention what the strategy is for the Senate. They're imposing a Noah's Ark strategy, which just means that they're trying to before they bring the vote to the floor, they want to make sure that they have the necessary votes. And so they are pairing a Democrat and a Republican as co-sponsors to the bill. So right now there are only 5 co-sponsors, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and an independent. And that's largely just so Republicans can't use that as a talking point. But hopefully that, look, no, we can't support this. That's all the Democrats. So we know how divided everything is right now. So it is a smart strategy, and hopefully we can get some votes. There's a short list that lobbyists are working on. The ERA Coalition specifically has people on the ground in Washington and all across the country, which is the beautiful thing. And yeah, I would say I will also echo Toby. It's so fun to contact your legislators. So I believe, sorry if I mispronounce her name, but I believe Cinema and Kelly are both on board for signing on as co-sponsors. But if they could reach across the aisle, if they have anyone that they could talk to or at least open dialogue with, it would be wonderful. And the more they hear from constituents that they support the ERA, the better. So that would be my call to action. And I didn't quite take up my 15 minutes, but I do want to allow time for questions. So I wasn't paying attention to the chat. Apologies if there were questions while I was talking. And I will put these links in the chat. I will share those.
Thank you so much, Tane. So I've been watching the chat, and I don't think there are any questions directly related to your talk, but we will open it up to questions now. So I see that Frankie has one, and we can't see everyone on the screen, so we'll kind of watch it. The people that are co-hosts can watch, but go ahead, Frankie.
Yeah, hi, Tane, thanks a lot. That was great. It's always good to continue to hear about the ERA. I also talk about the ERA as an academic, and one of the points that comes up is that the ways that we talk about gender now are very different from the ways that our heroine Sherwin talked about, the ways that we thought about gender, right, in 1920, 1930, 1940. And so in some ways the text feels like it doesn't pass the test of time, just because we have complicated gender so much. And so how are you all talking about that, and what does the conversation look like?
I think it is so true. It's just very, like, there's no 2 ways about it. That is very true. But at the same time, there would be footing for anyone to use this as their legislation. This is not only for women, this is for men. This is equality of, I would hope that everyone would interpret it as all sexes. I think it is true. We talk about a gender fluidity. We talk about that and don't address that with just straight up male and female sex. But they're embedded in the Constitution. And I talked about citizenship very briefly, and that was such a crash course. So I apologize if I was going through some of that quickly. But this would give standing. There is only the word man is mentioned in the Constitution, other than the 19th Amendment. That is the only time that woman is brought up. And so this does give some standing for legal issues to get brought before the courts. And that's an important thing, is the Equal Rights Amendment doesn't change anything immediately. It doesn't flip a switch. It just gives legal experts a footing to stand on and hopefully change laws that do discriminate against anyone.
Yeah, thanks. That's pretty much what I say as well, but I was curious about how we're packaging this. Thanks.
I want to mention that in reactions down below, you can raise your virtual hand if you want to, and we'll look for those. And you can also type your questions into the chat or raise your real hand like Ellen just did. So I may not go in the order that you raised your hand, so forgive me for that. But I'm going to have Ellen ask her question next.
Okay, so we had 38 states pass, which is what we need. And Bill Barr's Justice Department said, no, the archivist cannot publish this, which was overstepping his bounds to tell Congress what they should be doing. But this Barr memo was kind of lethal. Now Biden is in the process of apparently their new Office of Legislative Counsel person is being vetted by the Senate and has not been named yet as far as I know. But could that person not rescind the Barr memo and say, 38 states have passed this, we need to, you archivists, go ahead and do your job and publish that amendment in the Constitution. It seems like it's laid out. So have you heard anything about that, about the Biden administration's Justice Department rescinding the Barr memo? Do I sound pissed off? Yeah.
Rightfully so. Yes, so they have not said anything, but I only believe that to be the case because the AG has not been, like, they don't have their legislative office together yet because the process has been so slow vetting everyone and getting everyone into their cabinet positions. So I truly believe that that will be the case. I will also note, though, that I said this and kind of skipped over what that means. The archivist publishing the amendment is ceremonial. It does not do anything legally. And so there will be lawsuits starting January 20th of next year after that 2-year time limit has elapsed in the amendment itself, which is a normal thing for amendments to have, to give states and the federal government even time to adjust, if necessary, any legislation that does not comply with the amendment. And so January 20th of 2022, it will have been ratified by 38 states. The ERA will have been ratified by 38 states. And so there will be lawsuits that are brought forward anyways. So whether that happens or not, movement is going to get to come to fruition. Movement for the ERA and with the ERA is going to happen in courts. But there's a tiny, there's no precedent for this either. And so there is, I suppose, some kind of wording maybe that other legal scholars could find to say, well, it hasn't been published. And so there might be some blowback from that, which is why this Senate Joint Resolution 1 is our best bet for no one being able to argue against its ratification. So I hope, does that answer your question, Ellen? Hopefully.
And once again, we're
Beyond a
up
doubt.
against the filibuster. And once again, we're up against the filibuster.
Yeah. Yep.
I did want to mention that I muted, if you weren't already muted, I muted everyone. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So if you do have a question, you might have to unmute, or for some people, it seems not work for everyone. You can hold your space bar down and that unmutes you also. Okay, so other questions for Tane?
I see Helen has raised her hand.
Okay, Helen?
Tane, I was wondering, please, what do you say to people who tell you there's no need for the ERA now, that things are fine? What do you say?
I would reiterate a bit of what I already said. We need guaranteed rights. There is nothing in the Constitution that gives women guaranteed citizenship and rights without the ERA. And yes, we can vote, which is wonderful, but that's the only constitutionally guaranteed right that we have at the moment without the ERA. If that isn't enough, I don't know what is. Yeah, I really, there are many reasons, of course. And I will put in the chat, there's a great FAQ on the equalrightsamendment.org, which is a website that we try and keep updated. Well, we update, but we try and keep updated on contemporary issues that are going on and that might be helped with the ERA. So I would highly recommend that for talking points also.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Those are good talking points. Thanks for that. Okay, other questions for Tane? People are still coming in. It distracts me for a second, sorry. No? Okay, well, if you have other things that come up, you can put them in the chat. You saw the emails that Tane, would you mind putting those in the chat also? That would be good. So if people have other things that they want to email you, they'll have a place to do it. They'll know how to get to it. Thank you so much for being here. We so appreciate you being here and all of your hard work too.
Thank you all. It was such a pleasure. And thank you all for what you're doing. And yeah, just so impressed. Love this group.
Well, good. Well, thank you. Well, stick around because this is going to be a great program. Tane, also, there is a weekly update on the ERA that the Alice Paul Institute sends out. And maybe you could, anybody who's interested in getting a weekly update, and that's for any activity that happens all around the country, you can find out what's going on through that newsletter. So please, Tane, put that address in the chat as well. And thank you so much, and give our best to the people doing the work at the Alice Paul Institute. I know they have a lot of summer programs for kids that are in junior high school and high school. They take them to the United Nations. They do all kinds of wonderful girls leadership programs in the name of Alice Paul, in addition to teaching them women's history, which it's just a fascinating thing and a wonderful thing to do when you're sitting in her childhood home. It's awesome. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. So going from a somewhat depressing note to an even more depressing note, unfortunately, as you know, every day, the ability of women to make their own decisions about their bodies and their health and their reproduction is under attack. And things have been getting worse, not better. There is a war on women's health. It's conducted by the government, it's conducted by corporations, by religious groups. Our next speaker is Civia Tamarkin. She is very accomplished and has a wonderful and varied history. And mainly, she has a passion to stop the intrusion into women's health care. She has been fighting the good fight since the 60s. She is a filmmaker, director of a full-length documentary film called Birthright, A War Story, which shows the collateral damage from the war on reproductive rights and healthcare for women. Reviewers call it the real-life handmaiden's tale. It is available on Amazon and iTunes. So before Civia starts to speak to us, we are going to run a 2-minute clip, a trailer from the film, Birthright, A War Story. And I think this lays the groundwork for what she's going to talk about. And it's very, very important. Thanks so much. So Shelley, can you put the trailer clip on?
You got it.
Thank you.
It is a very scary time in the United States right now for a woman to become pregnant. Every aspect is now being subject to state punishment, control, and surveillance. There's 3 officers. They wanted to know if I had an unlawful miscarriage.
He's not the handcuffs. You have a warrant for your arrest.
She was still bleeding from having a baby.
say that life begins at conception.
Who speaks for the baby? We've been passing laws in state after state, and they think they're going to waltz in and just repeal them? It's not going to happen.
The anti-choice movements, they have moved into positions of power. We did not see the onslaught that was coming.
The last time this country dealt with an issue of this dynamic, we shot each other to dog rags on the Civil War battlefield.
Law had passed, it would be illegal to induce my pregnancy.
I could have lost my love of my life. It was 10 days of torture.
She didn't sign anything. What's going on here? How can they just be rolling her down the hallway into the operating room?
The state has the right to intervene in a woman's life from the second she becomes pregnant. That's an intrusion in the life of an individual that should shock every true conservative in this country.
2 to 3 women will die every day in the United States from pregnancy-related complications.
In some states, it's safer for a woman to go and give birth in a developing country.
I didn't want to have any more children. I had asked my doctor, can we go ahead and get my tubes? I was told no.
There's a lot of people who just simply have no idea how horrific it has been.
If we don't step in, all of these dominoes are going to come down together.
Thanks, Shelley. This is Civia is the producer, the director, the writer of this film, and we are really very honored that you're here with us today, Civia. Welcome. Okay, hold on, we can't hear you.
Okay, I think I have it.
Better.
Okay,
Good.
well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here to speak to this group, which I have heard so much about, and I certainly know Toby, and I have gotten to know Ellen a bit, and I'm very aware of all that you do. And we have collaborated. The Phoenicians and the Red Rock Indivisibles and women's groups, we certainly collaborated to segue from Tain in 2019 in trying to get the ERA passed here. And it is indeed the perfect transition because we were very confident, as most of you know, that that was going to pass in 2019. We had bipartisan support here. And at the very last minute, the Republican women who had supported it didn't show up for the vote. And one of them who voted no hid beneath the balcony at the far rear of the hall so that no one could see her negative vote. But what was most interesting about that is the reason they later said they could not support it is because there was such propaganda spread by Kathy Herod and the Center for Arizona Policy, which most of you know is a right-wing conservative lobbying group here. They had assured everybody that if you pass this, abortion will be legal. And therefore, those who might have been inclined to give women equal rights voted no because they were so fearful of abortion. And that leads us to the desperate, depressing, terrifying state, literally state of Arizona, but the state of affairs that we have with access to reproductive health care. The timing on this talk could not have been more auspicious given the Supreme Court decision on Monday to take up the Mississippi case, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which is a 15-week ban on abortion. We knew it was coming. I have to say, with the film that I did was a warning. We were attempting to fire the warning shots and sound the alarms that it was coming. The film was released theatrically in 2017. As Ellen said, it's still out there and available on all digital platforms, actually. But I have spoken across the country. I spoke in South Korea, and they passed the legalization of abortion. I mean, I spoke at a rally there. They showed the film there. I worked with activists in South Korea. They succeeded in moving forward. Ireland, as most of you know, moved forward years ago. South American countries are beginning to move forward. We are moving backward. And Arizona, in many ways, has paved that backward route. Arizona has always been, for those who don't know, the test run for model legislation that came out of Americans United for Life, or National Right to Life. Thanks to Kathy Herod again, who views herself as our 91st legislator here, these bills have been handed to her cronies, like Senator Bardo, and in the past, Senator Murphy McGee. These bills were introduced and they were passed. And they were the models. Arizona was one of the first states to have the parental consent, the first states to have the mandatory sonograms, one of the first states to have the mandatory waiting periods. We have laws on the books that, of course, are being, you know, they're in injunctive relief right now. But we have a litany, including a law that requires doctors to inform patients of abortion reversal from medicated abortion. Indiana has that law on the books now. We preceded it. We unfortunately have been the worst role model for these kinds of bills. And this is the year that is no different. We have paved the way and in many instances orchestrated how the situation has come to this point where Roe is gone. There is little doubt that Roe does not, will no longer be the law of the land. But in fact, Roe no longer exists for a majority of pregnant persons in this country. Over 90% of the counties in the United States have no providers. There is no access to abortion. There is no access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care. And because of the Hyde Amendment and because of Affordable Care Act interpretations and restrictions imposed by states, and also because of insurance bans, private insurance because of companies, state and federal insurers because of governmental mandates. So many people do not have access, even if there were a provider on the corner. Little do most people realize, if you are a professor at a state university, you won't have access to coverage for an abortion. If you work for the Department of Transportation, if you work in the U.S. Forestry, the U.S. Park Service, certainly the military, certainly governmental contractors, a woman in the military who is raped by a senior officer has no access to abortion coverage. But Arizona has been significant in laying the groundwork for that. So let me create a scene setter here to explain that. Among the marauding mix of white nationalists, neo-Nazis, Christian militia, and QAnon insurrectionists storming the Capitol on January 6th, threatening to hang Mike Pence and do harm to Nancy Pelosi. Among the Stop the Steal rally were abolitionists who want abortion criminalized as murder, as well as other anti-abortion groups and individuals associated with domestic terrorism, including a convicted clinic bomber who had served his time and was out on parole. Also at the rally was Jeff Durbin. For those who do not know him, he is the pastor at the Apologia Church in Mesa and the founder of End Abortion Now, which regularly harasses clinics and tries to persuade local lawmakers to create sanctuary cities for the unborn. And we have several of those in Arizona. Sanctuary cities for the unborn, yes, where abortion is illegal. Standing across the street from the Capitol as everybody was scaling the walls, Jeff Durbin was live streaming a report. And in that report, he said, quote, regardless of what happens here in DC, he said his group was working in 13 states with legislation consistent with the scriptures and was going to persuade local lawmakers to create sanctuary cities for the unborn. He said it's all about the gospel. Beside him was a man who identified himself with a group called the Red State Reform, and he sounded very much like the commander in The Handmaid's Tale, and added, as Christians, we need to be concerned about godly government. We serve the Lord and he orders godly government. 16 days later, on the 48th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, Arizona Republican State Rep, yours, Walt Blackman, introduced draconian anti-abortion law, which would require the death penalty for mothers and doctors. Standing right beside him was Pastor Jeff Durbin of the Apologia Church. Now, it's important to understand that this is the groundwork that has been cultivated, carefully strategized for 48 years. Interestingly, just as in 1976, the Republican platform supported ERA, prior to 73 and the legalization of abortion, the woman who headed the Republican Party also supported a woman's right to make her own medical decisions. The evolution of all of this is what led me to do the film, because, and I'm not here touting the film is 5 years old, but it is unfortunately and tragically more relevant today because it was prescient. We saw it coming, and I wanted to connect the dots. How did this happen? And what did happen is that the opposition movement was a cohesive, united, well-strategized, offensive front. And all of us let our guard down. As someone in the film says, we had the Supreme Court decision, the highest court in the land. We never saw the onslaught that was coming. In the film, I also have on camera the head of National Right to Life, Carol Tobias, who says, we have been planning from the day Roe became law. They have been conducting youth camps since then, summer retreats where they teach all about the evils and dangers of abortion. They then groomed these youth camp graduates to run for school boards, to run for state legislatures, to run for Congress. And it all bubbled up in 2010 with the Tea Party. Many of whom we have right here, the Debbie Leskos in Congress, Schweikert, we had Trent Franks, who you may have seen in the trailer there. And it was a carefully plotted strategy to begin, as Carol Tobias lays it out. I mean, when would you find an enemy general who is giving you the battle plan and said, we are going to whittle away. We are going to slowly erode row until there's nothing left, until we get it to the Supreme Court, where they look at it and say, what a mistake, and overturn it. And how do they do this? Again, my desire was to connect the dots. I always did that as a journalist. And so you follow the chronology where Ronald Reagan, who had been very much a supporter and signed California's law that legalized abortion, when he ran for president and announced his candidacy, the Big Tent theory came to the Republican Party. They embraced, if those of you are old enough to remember, Jerry Falwell and the moral majority. They saw the potential, the financial and the population potential of the huge evangelical ministries at the time. And so they decided the Republican Party would become the Big Tent. They would get money from these huge televangelist ministers and their followers, and they'd get the constituency. And so they partnered with the Heritage Foundation, et cetera, and the Republican Party became the anti-abortion party. Very interestingly, when George Bush was being considered as a VP candidate, he had to swear that he would go along with the platform, because George Bush's father, for those who don't know, Prescott Bush, had been on the original board of Planned Parenthood back in the 1920s. George Bush himself, Hubert Walker Bush, had been a strong advocate of family planning, had been, as a congressman, one of the sponsors of Title X funding. And of course, everybody knew that Barbara Bush was a strong advocate of a woman's right to make her own decisions. So as it evolved, as the Republican Party embraced the evangelicals, it became extremist. And again, these candidates on the local level, starting at school boards with banning sex education, and moving on to the state legislatures with eroding Roe v. Wade, starting with parental consent laws, of course, starting with the Hyde Amendment in 1976, and then moving on to parental consent laws, and moving to finally the decision, the Casey decision in 93, which was setting up the ground rules for an undue burden. And what that said was that states could enact legislation, even though Roe was the law of the land, states had the leeway to enact legislation that might restrict it as long as the legislation did not impose an undue burden. What is an undue burden? A lot of latitude in terms of that. And Arizona has been pushing to stretch that line all along. Arizona this year On the heels of that announcement by your rep for the bill that would have been a first-degree felony for abortion, Arizona introduced this session 12 anti-abortion bills. Not all of them were abortion bans. One of the bills would have been state funding for crisis pregnancy centers. For those who don't know what those are fake counseling centers. They are run by theological, evangelical operations nationwide. And what they do is fraudulently represent themselves as offering help with an unwanted pregnancy. And when they get pregnant persons in their wings there, so to speak, they begin telling them how terrible it is to have an abortion, tell them to think about it, go home and reconsider. I mean, they have been the subject of all kinds of litigation, including non-licensed people giving sonograms. I mean, in one case in California, an unlicensed tech showed a pregnant woman the fetus. It was an IUD. But they are not credible, nor are they credentialed and licensed. But their whole intent is to dissuade women or pregnant persons from having abortion. So one of the bills here was to fund that. Then, of course, your senator, Wendy Rogers, introduced the religious refusal bill. I testified against that because, in fact, she doesn't know what she's doing or talking about. An apology, you know, my regrets to all of you that she is your rep. Number one, we have religious refusal laws on the books in Arizona already. And there are federal religious refusal protections. Under Trump, the Department of Health and Human Services established the Civil Rights Division for protection of religious refusal, so that anyone, a pharmacist, a doctor, a physician's assistant, a nurse, any practitioner, does not have to perform a medical procedure that offends their religious beliefs. Now, you think that's just involving termination of pregnancy? No. That means that if they do not want to treat a transgender individual in an emergency room, or LGBTQ individuals, couples, because they're opposed to gay marriage, same-sex marriage, they don't have to. In fact, there was a case up in Minneapolis where a lesbian couple brought their 2-day-old baby for the first pediatric checkup. The baby was jaundiced and the pediatrician refused to treat her because she did not approve of the lifestyle of the parents. But that is protected. But here, Wendy Rogers, at a time of COVID, at a time where this state has many issues that could be addressed for the well-being of you, her constituents, she's introducing a religious refusal bill. And what was interesting about that bill is that it basically, as I testified, was state-sanctioned malpractice, because a doctor seeing that the health was in danger still may not be able to perform a termination unless the life was in danger. As one of the doctors say in the film, at what point is a woman's life in danger? Must she be in full sepsis? Must she be fully hemorrhaging? Or is her life endangered because she has an infection, or because there may be long-term lasting pulmonary, cardiac, neurological implications from a dangerous pregnancy? Fortunately, that bill didn't go anywhere. There were, as I said, 12 bills. We thought we had been successful. What we did here in Arizona, very, very proud of the fact that all of the progressive organizations banded together and we formed a coalition for reproductive rights, the Arizona Coalition for Reproductive Rights, an unofficial group. But it wasn't just Planned Parenthood, National Council of Jewish Women, it was Equality Now, it was disability groups, it was ACLU, Progress Now, I mean, a litany of 20 some groups. And we strategized. And we, of course, brought in ACOG, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and for the first time, ARMA, the Arizona Medical Association, which had never been active before. In fact, one of my great laments is that the American Medical Association has stayed on the sidelines with these issues, understandably because they have a diverse membership. But this time we got the president of the American Medical Association to testify remotely from Texas against some of these bills. And we were able to show that some of these bills were harmful, in fact, and would prevent medical practice, sound medical practice. The Blackmun bill never saw the light of day, fortunately, because even Kathy Herod and opponents of medical choice would like to portray themselves as helping to promote the safety of pregnant women. So they did not want to be associated with the execution of women who would terminate a pregnancy. So that bill never saw the light. But SB 1457, the egregious personhood bill that we thought we finally had killed in committee, resurfaced at the 11th hour through a rules change that the Republicans made. And of course, there was opposition to that again. And they went back to the drawing boards with a compromise, which is ludicrous in and of itself. But it finally passed and made it to governor's desk. And of course, he signed it. What was interesting behind the scenes on that bill is that, you know, the one senator who opposed certain provisions of it, for example, this is extraordinary because we now have the first abortion ban linked to personhood. Other states have passed amendments to their constitutions, Alabama, Missouri, a few others. We did not change our constitution, but we passed a law that states at any stage of development, they say the unborn, we say at any stage, fertilized eggs, zygotes, embryos, fetuses have the same constitutional rights and protections as any other resident of the state. And then they further say, subject to constitutional interpretation by the US Supreme Court. This was a bill intentionally drafted to make its way to the Supreme Court, as was the ban in Arkansas, which outright outlawed abortion under all circumstances, including rape and incest, except for the mother's life. And Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, specifically said, I know this bill will be banned by the lower courts, held up on injunction, but we are drafting it and signing it so it will go to the Supreme Court. That was the intent of our SB 1457 as well. The bill that not only defines the personhood, but prevents abortions for the reason of genetic anomalies. We already had race and gender bans on the books, but now we have one that would ban termination for lethal genetic anomaly. That was the compromise for the one senator. He insisted they put in lethal. So lifelong severe genetic anomalies that may only result in life for several months cannot be terminated. Things like Tay-Sachs, which, a fetus born with Tay-Sachs can, the infant could live a year or so, not with any quality of life and with NICU support. However, these things are not into consideration, and were not brought into consideration. Interestingly enough, this senator was also concerned about the lucrative business of in vitro fertilization. So they carved that out of personhood. Mind you, that fertilized eggs in a petri dish do not have constitutional rights, but fertilized eggs swimming upstream in the birth canal do. And this bill is part of, not only is it an embarrassment to the state like all the other bills here, but it is part of the pipeline intentionally created by none other than our Arizona, legal team, Alliance Defending Freedom, the legal team that brought you the wedding cake suit out of Denver, that brought the lawsuit here from the calligraphy invitation shop managers who did not want to do invitations for gay marriages. Alliance Defending Freedom, based in Scottsdale, is the legal arm of the right-wing movement. And their intent has been to fill the pipeline with so many cases that eventually they have to bubble to the surface. And now, with the balance tipped in the Supreme Court, the first bill to come up is the Mississippi 15-week ban. Now, this is the first time there is a constitutional challenge to Roe v. Wade. In the past, all the challenges had to do with restrictions, had to do with the so-called, you may know the term, trap laws, the targeted restrictions against providers, restrictions that had to do with the width of the hallways and the doorways, etc., within clinics. That was shot down through the Texas case in 2016. But last June, what happened in the Louisiana case, June v. Russo, another suit that challenged the trap laws, the restrictions against the size and the proximity to a hospital and so on of a clinic. That case, Roberts, Supreme Court Justice Roberts, upheld the stare decisis, the precedent of the Texas case, and ruled that that trap law in Louisiana could not stand. But, and this is where we're at now, but for all the jumping for joy that it was upheld, that Roe lived, what no one really paid attention to was Roberts' decision just stretched that meaning of undue burden. So now it has to be substantial burden. They have to prove that there is a substantial burden on the pregnant person. Enter this case and Clarence Thomas, who has no use for stare decisis, who always cites the fact that slavery was the law of the land, that was precedent, and that was overturned, so stare decisis should have no standing. Clarence Thomas, who always said that Roe was not constitutional. Now we have Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Amy. So it is everyone's belief that Roe is done. Even though I said earlier, de facto, Roe is gone for most women in this country, particularly women of lower income, women of color, women in certain regions, rural regions, etc. So we are at a crossroads here because it's all going to come back to states. Supreme Court we are going to revert to where we were January 1973. It is going to be up to the states to determine. We have 22 states that already have laws on the books banning various bans. We have 9 states that have kept their pre-Roe restrictions that would immediately go into effect, and we have 10 states that have trigger laws that would immediately outlaw abortion when Roe goes. No waiting, no time period, done. So what do? I have to say that when I was touring with the film, people would say, I mean, I was an activist in the 60s, like many of you. People would say, why is this 70-year-old woman out there? And I'd say, because my 25-year-old granddaughter is not. Because they do not believe that they are under threat. They have this presumption that once you attain a certain right, you're not going to lose it. Well, we know better. We saw what happened with voting rights now. We see what happens with the right to privacy and to make one's own medical decisions. So what can we do here? It goes back to the fact that we have to, and I'm speaking to you now because you have heavily Republican district there, we have to be very careful and very strategic about whom we elect to office. We came so close in the state legislature this time, but not, one vote apart in the Senate, might as well be 10. It doesn't matter. So we have to focus now on strategizing for elections. And we have to certainly put all of our efforts into supporting HR 1, into, quite frankly, leaning heavily on Sinema, who will not, she supports the bill, but it's almost paradoxical because she supports the, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but she is opposed to the filibuster, which is necessary to get it passed. So we need to exert pressure on her, even if the Democratic Party here has to say, yeah, we're going to primary you out. I mean, there have to be consequences. And as we're moving forward, this coalition, de facto coalition, as I call it, of strategists, accountability must be held. These people must be held accountable for what they have done, what they are doing, and what we foresee them doing in the future. And so on this very bittersweet note, I can only say the only optimistic light is to mobilize that electorate the right way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Civia. That was an incredible presentation with a ton of information that I didn't know anything about. Yeah, so I'll talk more about my reaction in a minute, but yeah, I have quite the visceral reaction. So, but we'll take questions now. So does anyone have questions for Civia? Go ahead, Toby.
It's good to see you, Civia, number one. I just wanted to say, in the past, I've had, terrible experiences. A friend who couldn't have children because of a back alley abortion, an experience my husband told me about in Chicago, back alley abortion. So that's unfortunately, I guess, what we'll be going back to. But I had written down, and I know you answered this question in one way, which was elect officials. But is there anything that we can do to, in Arizona? Is there a working group that can form, Civia? Is there anything we can do here to, before electing all of these officials who might not get elected, to help with the ERA and to help, as you know, you were talking about how organized the Republicans were. How about us? Thank you.
Well, we're working at it. You know, I have to say that one of the handicaps that we have had has been this fractionalized defense line. You know, without getting into another 20-minute dissertation here, second wave feminists never understood that choice was a terrible word. That if you have no options, you have no choice. And disenfranchised women of color took issue with that. They started the reproductive justice movement. There are different groups now. There's the National Latina Women for Reproductive Health, there's Sister Song, there's various factions, and Planned Parenthood, NARAL are no longer representative of the needs of everybody. So to get to your point, we're trying to bring everyone together now. That's what that Coalition for Reproductive Rights and Justice is all about here. We were strategizing together, and we are now working on accountability and how we are going to hold these individual state legislators accountable. So yes, let's all work together. We will keep in touch. Certainly Raquel Turan is part of this group, and you know, the Democratic Party, therefore. And we're hoping we can strategize ways of doing this and leaning on cinema, certainly electing officials. Arizona List has been part of this. I mean, I have always said that, you know, with regard to Emily's List or Arizona List, that they have to change the way they do business. You know, I'm a native Chicagoan. I know backroom Democratic politics very well. And having candidates just because they support reproductive rights is not enough. They have to be viable candidates. You need that old kingmaker mentality that says to people, you know, you are fabulous, you are smart, you are this, you are that, but you're not going to win in Mesa. So we need to put up somebody who can. And we need more strategizing. So let's all work together. Absolutely. Let's keep in touch. Let's figure out ways to do that. But accountability and electability is really where it's all at now. All the rallies, and there are going to be, you might keep in touch, there are rallies that are going to take place. In fact, I think there's a sit-in today. There's another one on June 19th, all through the summer regarding the HR 1 and trying to pressure cinema. But the best way is to keep those phone calls going to her office and then strategizing all together, all the groups. Planned Parenthood and NARAL cannot take the lead anymore. Number one, we have to get away from the language of choice. Pro-choice vernacular fit the 70s. It does not fit today. People don't have choices if there's no access. So we have to, you know, change the way we talk about this. We need to bring young people in who realize that they have, it doesn't affect me, doesn't affect many of you, but it does affect them, and build coalitions grassroots up.
Thank you. And Marilyn has a question. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Yeah, what's the current status of the morning after pill? I haven't been following it closely as of late.
Oh, interestingly, sorry, I omitted that. Banning that was part of 1457, along with medicated abortion pills by mail. So now you have to, you know, get the medication in the presence of a physician. That's part of that bill. Let me also say, somebody, maybe it was Toby, who said we're going to go back to the back alley abortions. No, the coat hanger is no longer going to be the symbol. Jail bars are going to be the symbol, because medication will be available, even if you get it online from Canada. The problem is, if you get it through the mail and it's illegal, it will be a federal crime. In some states, because it's banned in Arizona, it could be a state crime with criminal penalties. So what this bill 1457 and other bills around the country do is criminalize pregnancy. That was a few excerpts from, I apologize that the audio wasn't as good, but those were, you saw handcuffs, you got the gist of it. That was what is, you know, the point of that was all about. It's the criminalization of pregnancy. Think about what happened in Alabama about 2 years ago. A pregnant woman got into an altercation with another woman in a parking lot. The other woman pulled out a gun and shot her in the abdomen, killed the fetus. Who was charged? The pregnant woman was charged with provoking an argument and then causing the death of her fetus. And there have been case after case after case around the country where the behavior, something a pregnant woman did or did not do, resulted in the criminalization, in her criminalization because of perceived or real child endangerment. So a New York woman was in an auto accident. Another couple tragically was killed in that accident, but so was her fetus, and she was charged with the manslaughter of her fetus. On and on and on.
Okay, other questions?
This is Frankie.
Go ahead, Frankie.
I have my hand up,
Okay.
and I have a question. So thank you so much. Fabulous. I feel, although I feel like I'm nailed to the back of my chair. I mean, my physical reaction to your presentation was just is a reflection of how striking what you're saying to us is. And I'm faculty at NAU, and I teach in women's and gender studies. So this is something that we deal with, but I think that you gave us such a clear understanding of this onslaught and how close we are. I mean, this notion that Roe v. Wade is, I mean, I'm giving myself goosebumps just repeating what you said. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, it struck me when you were speaking. I don't know if I have a question so much but that it struck me when you were speaking that, yeah, this is sort of like the whole Donald Trump thing, right? That the Republicans realized they had to get more votes, they had to cater to the religious right, and since Reagan, which we all remember, right? And then they suddenly, like Frankenstein, like the women, the misogynists are like let loose, right? And and so then the activity becomes this sort of whack-a-mole, right? Of like trying to get these bills, and it's a genius strategy, really, right? Which I think the left had in some ways with civil rights as well, right? Bringing cases forwards, seeing what cases would work. Yeah, so I appreciate that you ended with this notion of our elected officials and that you reminded us throughout your talk that this is happening here in our state and we have a responsibility for this. So I think we're all trying to do what we can. You know, we were really upset that the district didn't turn last go around. But I really appreciate, and I also appreciate your comment about the second wave, right, and reproductive justice. I think that's right on target. In talking to my students, because many of them grew up in Mesa, right? They like are part of this, like, oh, I'm afraid to take this course because I don't want to talk about abortion. But framing it as part of a conversation about reproductive rights and what happened with Indigenous women, right, and forced sterilization, right, makes it a bigger policy conversation. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, any insight on getting rid of Black men and pushing cinema, I think we would all find very refreshing. So yeah, I don't know if you have any more insights on that, but just thank you. A great.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Yesterday, Governor Abbott of Texas signed legislation banning abortion from 6 weeks on. Most women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. Very sad.
Well, better yet, what I keep telling people is that this is coming down to the modern day Scopes trial. This is religion versus science. Number one, Where is the medical community? There is no heartbeat at 6 weeks. There is no heart. What you hear at that point is the pulsation of electrical impulse that will, the nerves that will eventually attach to what becomes the heart. We have been saying that the medical community has not stood up and said this is rubbish because the reasons we said, AMA spokespeople can't do it. But this is now down to science because it's viability. There is no viability at 6 weeks. There is no viability at fertilization, for God's sake. There is no viability in a test tube or petri dish or up the birth canal. And this is what we are considering challenging at this point. So a group of us are in discussions. There will be a suit filed against 1457 seeking injunctive relief. And this time we have said to Planned Parenthood and NARAL, go to the back. You are perceived as the abortion industry. Not rightfully, but you are perceived that way. So anything you say at this point is not going to be influential. And we're trying to find other strategy. I will say that I'm involved because National Council of Jewish Women, we are arguing that this is a free practice of religion challenge. Judaism, for example, does not recognize personhood until birth, until a limb emerges. In fact, biblically, definition, the first 40 days are considered nothing more than water. And a fetus is defined as a part of the body, no different than a thigh. So we're looking for expanded ways of challenging this that is not the same old, same old. We're also looking, and I've been talking with, I have to say, constitutional scholars about this, Erwin Chemerinsky, who is a dean of Berkeley Law School, and several others. And we're trying to figure out a different approach because we now know that just saying the ban on genetic anomaly for the reason of genetic anomalies is not going to work because the 6th district upheld that ban in Ohio. Now people say our 9th district federal courts are different. Not all of them. There have now been, thanks to Trump's 217 federal judges, there are now enough of them sprinkled throughout the 9th district as well. So we're trying to find different challenges. And one of those also includes expanding, okay, what is substantial burden? Well, the health of the parents here, the mother, the health of the family, the psychological, emotional, financial health of the family is burdened by being forced to deliver a fetus with severe genetic anomalies. And what is so interesting, in fact, I wrote down the number of this bill, this hypocritical state legislature that cares so much about protecting disabled unborn did not pass HB 2540, a bill that would have given funding for spina bifida. For children with spina bifida, right now they're cut off from state funding from the Department of Developmental Disabilities at age 6. There was a bill proposed to extend that because of developmental delays and to extend that state funding. That they didn't pass. Nor they're so concerned about the well-being of the mother and the well-being of the, quote, unborn. They did not pass HB 2291, which would provide dental care for pregnant women. Prenatal, dental care. So the hypocrisy of what they do is just beyond belief. But they were more concerned with the morning after, they were more concerned about medication and sending doctors to jail, which really does, it seems to me, as we try to put together plaintiffs in this suit, that we need to bring in the medical community, because are they then not in violation of their oath and their licensure if they see that a pregnancy can cause health issues, not lethal to the pregnant person, but long-term health issues, and they are so fearful of being charged with a Class X felony and serving up to 5 3/4 years in prison that they do not inform? So there's all kinds of ramifications for this. And what happens to the aspect of that bill that prevents university institutions, university hospitals from making any abortion referrals? So if an oncologist is consulting with a pregnant patient who has breast cancer, and the oncologist says, we cannot treat you unless you terminate the pregnancy because we cannot give you radiation and chemotherapy while you're pregnant. Is that a referral? Would that oncologist then be subject to the Class 6 felony? There are so many ramifications of this bill that we have to sort out through the courts. Ellen?
Yeah, some of my members of the book club that I'm in, we just read A Moment of Lift by Melinda Gates, and she talks about unwanted pregnancies just because of the impact on their families and the poverty that it would throw them in to have additional children. Forget about the medical complications, just adding children that are unwanted can have devastating effects on a family and their financial health.
Sure. So that affects the health of everybody in the family by extension. If there isn't money for nutritious food, for the right kind of shelter, for the right kind of health care, etc. So all of this has to be sorted out, but we are riding the wave. And, I'm glad that I'm sorry, I forgot your name, the NAU professor brought up Trump, because the opposition kept their eye on the ball. They had one prize, the Supreme Court. They bit their tongue, they bit their lip. I mean, if there is anyone who violated every principle of the religious right, seemingly violated, and we all know the hypocrisy, but it's Trump. But they had their eye on the Supreme Court. That was the prize. We let our guard down. And we allowed ourselves to be distracted by so many other things and so many petty squabbles and other things. We never kept our focus on not just reproductive healthcare access, but voting rights, civil rights. We just let our guard down. So, somebody said, why you do this? I said, because everything I took to the streets for in the late 60s is being unraveled. So, come full circle, I'm back doing the very same thing.
So I see we have 3 more hands up, and I know we're running a little later than usual. So maybe we could, have these questions and answers that are pretty brief, I think, so people stay on to hear everything. But we'll start with Toby, and then we will do Peggy and Marilyn, and then we're going to wrap it up. Go ahead, Toby.
Okay, mine'll be real short. I think you should solve this problem by going on Rachel Maddow's show. You have so much information, and just as some of it's new to us, it might be new to the public. That's just one thing. And the other is that women and men across the country, they'll go crazy if Roe v. Wade is overturned, and they'll be on the streets. And before that, when you're on Rachel, you'll be informing people. So they'll know about, a lot of the, I won't go into it, but a lot of the information you gave us. And again, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Go ahead, Peggy.
Oh, I just wanted to say we at DORR and many of the Democrats are trying to start a new campaign where we really let the public know of what our now in office elected officials have been doing. And I think that's really the crux of the matter is, I mean, they have to leave. We have to inform the public of the irreparable damage they're doing on so many issues. So I just look for ways that those messages can be put out to the public in a very understandable way, that the person's photo and then what they've done and how it affects especially younger people and women, it will affect them personally. This person is doing this to you and your life. So I look forward to being part of that campaign, and I hope it'll help us.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a great idea. I briefly would like to say that what we're trying to suggest here, and don't have it formalized, but you can do it on your own. Scorecards, starting now, pre-election, not between the two candidates, but just summarizing, okay. Ongoing, what was done, and not even in terms of this issue alone. I mean, what is outrageous is that in a time of COVID, at a time of economic depression, at a time where people are losing jobs and losing their businesses, et cetera, what have these legislators done in this session to address the concerns, the everyday life concerns? That's what you should address. That's what you should look through. There were no bills introduced. And why not? Because they were fixated on their own agenda. I mean, we have talk about water shortages here. Where's the money for that? Where's our infrastructure? Where's everything that affects people's lives?
Just to say,
that's the score
when we have the campaign time, we get a pile of campaign brochures, but throughout the rest of the time, we need to be sending things so people get things regularly, and it's regularly put out there. And someone said, put it in the newspaper too. We need to just keep streaming it in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point, Peggy. Thank you. And Marilyn?
Yes, thank you. Civia, thank you. Wonderful, wonderful, very informative presentation. I'm having some evil thoughts here that I wanted to share with you. And that is this: if assuming that we're correct in that the burden of reduced opportunities for abortion falls disproportionately on Black and brown and poor people, then it might be a really sly thing to talk with the dog whistle cohort that supports these anti-abortion bills and be saying to them, well, but why are you trying to increase the population of poor and Black and brown people?
Well, I can address that one just by what I was told. So I appeared on an all-Black radio station. And what happened was just that was raised. And the answer was to feed the prison pipeline. You know, Martin Luther King was a strong advocate of birth control. Obviously, with birth control, you're able to elevate your economic status, right? So neo-Nazi propaganda does include the notion that populations of color should multiply because it is low income labor and because it will keep them down. And so even you may recall back in Charlottesville when Heather Heyer was killed in the, by the car, the Der Strom, the online digital Nazi, neo-Nazi newsletter said she deserved to die because she was a single white female who had not lived up to her responsibility to procreate for her race. So there is an element of, we want to keep down populations of color because it will keep them economically subservient.
You want to keep down the populations of color?
That's the thinking of the coalition of these white supremacist, Christian militia, abortion abolitionists. They want to keep them down.
Well, if you prevent them from having abortions, you're encouraging them to increase.
But their perverse rationale is that it becomes a subservient economically subservient population. It's not logical, but then, you know, you're talking about extremists here. And their feeling is that we need to, you know, let them do their thing, but we will increase our numbers and they will be held down. The more children they have, the more so-called welfare moms, but we're not going to pay for welfare either.
Yeah.
So we're going to create a larger disadvantaged population.
I have to take a deep breath.
Yeah,
You know,
yes.
So first of all, I want to say, Civia, thank you so much for being here. Amazing, like I said before, amazing presentation. You know, it's tough information to hear, and it's a bit discouraging, both your presentation about the ERA, but then to me, where my mind goes is we have to fight. We have to continue fighting. We have to never stop fighting. You know, we need people like you that are really organizing these efforts, and some of this I will take to our committees to talk about what we can do.
Yes.
We need to fight. We need to be organized. And if you're not activated already, I think most of the people on this call are on this Zoom meeting are. But if you're not already, please get involved. We need every single person. And if you can pull your significant other in, then that doubles that, right? If you have a significant other. So we need everyone to fight. I mean, Toby's doing such a great job with the action committee. That's a great place to get started. You get scripts, as she said. You can write letters to Cinema and Kelly, or emails, or make phone calls to say, hey, if you support the ERA, get some other people on the other side of the aisle and pull them over. You know, we can do action also through the Reproductive Rights Consortium, or what you called it. So we need to all stay involved. We need to all fight. We need to not give up, because that's what's going to happen. Things are going to change, and we are going to be successful. So it's like a domino effect. The fact that we didn't get that one, that we didn't get enough people elected to our state legislature, you can see the domino effects of all the stuff that's happening. So we cannot give up. That's my key message to everyone. So, there's a lot of great information in the chat. If you haven't looked at the chat, I'll leave it up for a minute. So there's great links to the movie that Civia did, and also Steve Hanks has a Facebook page about voting rights. So you might want to look through the chat before you leave and see if you want to capture any of those links. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss a topic that is obsessive and critical and necessary to address.
Yes, exactly. We're all working together. And I have to say, I know that Steve was on here, and I've seen some husbands in the background, but women are powerful. And so that's what we're going to go forward with, that thought in our head. Okay. So everyone have a wonderful Thursday, and we'll see you next month.